Welcome to the XT Podcast, your ultimate destination for valuable insights, practical advice, and inspiring stories that will transform the way you experience business, governance, and life. Join your host, Ashutosh, as he dives deep into three distinct editions: Customer Experience Edition, where industry leaders discuss CX strategies, product brand, employee experience, digital innovations, and best practices for improving customer engagement, retention, and loyalty.
Hello, namaste, and welcome to the XT podcast. Today's guest is a master of leadership and revenue growth. With over 30 years of experience spanning the United States Navy, Fortune 500 companies like Dell and NTT Data, and industries like defense and cybersecurity, Bob Britton has led high impact teams across 6 continents, applying a results driven approach to sales, customer success, and business strategy. Now, as founder and CEO of Revenue Generation Strategies, Bob helps SMBs and mid market companies transform customer service, support, and success. The 3 C's, as he calls it, from cost centers into revenue engines. His expertise lies in aligning CX with business growth, ensuring customer facing functions drive top line performance. In this episode, we dive into how businesses can monetize CX, the leadership lessons Bob brings from the United States Navy to the corporate world, and how companies can better align sales and CX for long term success. Bob's no nonsense, practical approach makes this a must listen for anyone looking to turn customer interactions into business impact. Let's get started. Hey, Bob, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence on my podcast. Really appreciate your time and availability. Thank you.
Happy to do so, Ash.
It's a pleasure to have you, Bob, especially because with you, what I see is a very rich experience spanning several focus areas, and especially someone who has served the nation and then has been in corporate, which is quite a transition, I must say. So at the very outset, I would love to ask you about leading teams in military and in corporate. These are two distinct environments. So if there were some call outs you could make on key leadership principles that you have picked up, which translate across both corporate and military, which especially could be applied to customer facing teams, I would love to hear that from you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, I was in the military, and those of you who haven't looked at my profile, I was in the Navy, the United States Navy, for about 10 years. It's interesting when you're leading people in the Navy as compared to the corporate world. The focus is different between corporate and military life. In the military, it's all about the mission. Right? Finances, budgets, and things like that take a little bit of a back seat to the fact that we're trying to get to a mission. In corporate world, it's different because now we're really focused on the financial metrics. The metrics that we use to measure what we're doing are a little bit different in the corporate world. And that affects how we approach things, right? If it's all about the money, then people tend to really back off a little bit on the underlying mission of it all, right? So what I try to do is I try to bring that mission aspect more into what's happening in the corporate life. And if they take their focus off the finances just a little bit, I find that the performance of people actually improves a great deal. So that's one of the things. I think probably one of the biggest differences, this is more of a day-to-day kind of tactic approach, is that in the corporate world, we tend to explain and then answer. In the military world, we tend to answer and then explain.
Wow.
So there's a difference there, right? So that means in the military, because you need to act quickly upon any available information, you need to answer it. And if there's time to explain it, great. If not, they'll run with the answer that you give them. It requires that you really understand your field very well and that you're confident in the answer you're about to give. But I find a lot of the times in the civilian world, people will dance around, explain the answer that they're about to give before they finally get around to giving it to you. So I get just to slow things down just a little bit. So those are a couple of the differences. But as far as leadership is concerned, people are people. It's a matter of knowing what it takes for them to motivate themselves. You can't really motivate people. You have to learn what it is that they need in order to self-motivate. And then accountability is huge. You have to be able to make sure that people are not only responsible, but accountable for what it is that they're about to do. So those are just a few of the things.
Beautiful. I loved your call outs on, if I were to summarize, on one side, there's purpose and the other side is trust, an implicit trust, because if you are told to do something, you do it without questions on one side. On the other side, you want to know why, and you ask so many questions before you are clear about what needs to be done, and then act. In corporate, we could do a lot better with the leaders focusing on purpose alignment and building a sense of collaboration and trust, which I feel today's leaders miss out on. I mean, there's a sense of leadership by role, leadership by designation, rather than leadership by clarity of purpose, leadership by aligning people towards the common purpose. I've seen servicemen in general, they have this sense of action, the sense of urgency, the sense of accountability, which is very natural. Is there any way we could inculcate this in corporate as well?
Well, first of all, the metrics that are used in the corporate world are lagging metrics.
Yes.
So when we're talking about finances or anything along those lines, it's like trying to drive forward while looking in the rearview mirror.
Yes. Beautiful. Yes.
So it's a little bit difficult to do, and it doesn't always produce the best results. Comparatively speaking, if we focus on what's directly in front of us and what's ahead of us when it comes to more of a mission approach than the liking indicator approach, you tend to have more agility. You're better aligned to what's going to happen in the future as compared to some other folks that might be just so concerned about what has happened in the past and letting them drag you down. It also does tend to lend to creativity, improvisation, innovation, those types of things. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't think of the military as being very improvisational or innovative, but it really is.
Absolutely.
because things do not always go as planned, and so you have to be
Right.
agile. You have to be able to. You got to get the job done somehow. So find a way to do it, and so that's part of the military ethos.
Amazing. I've also heard about frontline empowerment, which is so obvious and must in military, navy, the defense forces globally, because only those on the ground know what's happening, and therefore they need to take actions based on what they see, rather than someone in a boardroom at the back guiding them what needs to be done. We exactly do the opposite in corporate, when we don't let the salespeople, customer service personnel decide what they should do. Have you witnessed that as well? The frontline empowerment being a key challenge.
Very much so. In the military, for example, you're given responsibilities right up front on the front line at a very early age.
Yes.
You
Yes.
have kids that are 20 years old signing aircraft off, say, for flight, and there were anywhere between 2 and dozens of souls that are actually on that airplane that are going to be in the air, right? So that right there is huge. There's also a story about an aircraft carrier where it's very busy, of course, on the flight deck. And there was I believe it was a Russian admiral or something that was visiting the ship. And during the flight operations that the Russian admiral was observing, he noticed that somebody on the flight deck had called out for everything to stop because there was a safety issue. And the Russian admiral looks down and he says, that must be a very important person in order to stop all the movement on the flight deck. And the skipper of the aircraft carrier said, no, he's just an airman, but he saw something wrong. And so he stopped everything on the flight deck so we could actually correct the problem. He saw a safety issue and he stopped it all. And so that's, again, empowerment at a very young age. So yeah, that's how it works.
Beautiful example, Bob. Thank you for bringing that out. In fact, I love the earlier phrase that you used, that you cannot drive while looking at the rear mirror in some way. And if I were to use that analogy for the customer success, customer service, customer support teams, often what I see is, because of the focus on lagging indicators, they are looked at more as cost centers. How can we change the mindset from these teams being looked at as cost centers to now being looked at as revenue drivers?
Well, the first thing to understand is that the world of revenue generation is changing rapidly. It used to be that revenue would come in primarily, almost exclusively, through the sales team. Now that's expanding. It's no longer just the sales team. You now have e-commerce, which is typically run by, well, in a lot of organizations, marketing. Then you also have customer service. And customer service can bring revenue in through cross-selling and upselling. And quotas are actually sometimes assigned to marketing for their e-com and CS for their cross-selling and upselling. So the whole mindset of where revenue is coming from is changing. In terms of it being a cost center, a lot of it just simply has to do with where these things show up first of all, on a financial statement. They're part of the SG&A. And so what ends up happening is they're looked at as a cost rather than an asset. But that aside, a lot of companies are very product focused. And so that's where they put their concentrated effort, which is to the product development. They'll do, for example, product-led growth. Everything's about the product. But a lot of companies that do that are forgetting the fact that there's a customer that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so customer centricity is something that is absolutely critical. It's something that I promote heavily, which is to ensure that they're looking at the customer as really the goal here, not the product, not the sale, but the customer. And because they cannot control the customer. They can control the product, they control everything else that happens within their world, but they cannot control the customer. So if they focus more on the customer and how the customer is making decisions, what drives them to make the decisions that they are, and start cooperating with them, rather than trying to control the customer during a sales evolution, things just go much better.
Very well said, Bob, and I cannot agree more. Unfortunate that while there are these concepts like customer lifetime value, and I do not see the organization investing in these functions as aggressively as they should. And another bigger challenge I foresee is also the silos that exist, Bob, that, as you rightly called out, even marketing might have a KPI for them on leads, but then that's separately tracked. It's a silo in itself. Then they hand over the leads to sales. Sales would possibly follow through, qualify, nurture, close, and that's another silo. Then they'll hand over to customer support success. Now that's a separate silo. And I see huge challenges in this handshake itself. The marketing may give qualified leads and sales will say the leads were not good enough. Sales will oversell, overpromise, overpitch, and the burden comes on customer success of having to bear the promises that are being made by sales, and sales will already have its hands off because they are now targeting a new prospect already. So how do we ensure that silos are broken and all these teams work together for a common purpose, that the customers last, the customers stay happy, and we continue to add value to them for the lifetime? So how do we break these silos, Bob?
Sure. So one of the things has to do with the mindset of the silos themselves. To marketing, for example, once the customer is onboarded, given to sales, they tend to step back quite a ways. And so they're not really involved very much. To sales, once they get a signature on on the dotted line and the contract is signed, they tend to step back from everything and kick that over the fence to customer service. So what I prefer to have people do is look at the relationship between the company as a whole and the customer as a relay race. And the customer is the baton that the different people are going to be holding and passing. So when a customer first comes aboard, that's the first leg of the relay race. And so they're running with marketing. But at some point in time, marketing is going to run in the same lane as sales, and they're going to hand off the baton to the sales team. And then as that happens, there's a bit of interaction there, and the customer doesn't feel just tossed. There's more of a smooth handoff, if you will, from one group to another. And then the same thing happens with sales. When the sales has the baton and they're running and they're trying to find out what's happening with the customer, are they ready to buy? Will they buy from us? When it comes time to fulfill the order that they have, what they have to do then is they have to take the baton and pass it to the CS team. And so there's a handoff that occurs there, right? And they're running together at the same time. Again, the customer does not feel tossed over the fence. So that's a better way to look at it than saying, I have a finite line that I have to cross, and then I'm done with this particular customer. Understand that customers, when they come aboard, they are coming aboard with your entire company for a year, 2, 3, 10, 20, who knows, right? But it's almost like you're bringing aboard a family member rather than just simply a contract and a number. So that's the way that you need to look at things.
Beautiful. I like that. One challenge that I have often heard is sales happens to build the strongest relationship while nurturing a lead, prospecting, building relationships and rapport, understanding the requirement, and then closing in through the contract phase, and so on. So there's a huge one-on-one personal relationship that the sales is built. And often when customer is passed from sales to customer success, this trust cannot be passed on. All customer information can be passed on, contract can be passed on, promises can be communicated. But how do we effectively push the trust from sales on customer success?
The first thing to understand is that the sales cycle itself for some companies is very short. It's only a
Yes.
week. Okay.
Right.
Or less sometimes. Other places, depending upon the size of the deal and the complexity of it all, it can be a year or two that they're
Yes.
with a particular sales team. So, yes, the length of time that they're spending with each individual team has a lot to do with it. It's also important to remember that after the sale is done, the primary point of contact is no longer sales, it is customer service.
Yes.
Okay, so it's important that the concept of trust and respect really be emphasized here. And you have to think of those as bank accounts that you have to build up first and that you make withdrawals from when needed. So what you're doing is with the customer, you have to build the trust and respect every single step of the way, because you never know when you're going to have to make withdrawal. If something goes sideways, things almost never go smoothly, okay? So you're going
Correct.
to have to make a small withdrawal, sometimes maybe a large withdrawal at times, but unless you've done the work beforehand to make sure that the trust and respect are there in those accounts, you have nothing to draw from, and you wind up with a very unhappy customer. So what you need to do is just focus on those. The other thing is just to make sure that the handoff, if you will, between sales and CS, one of the things that we actually need to take a look at is customer success. Maybe now's a good time to really explain the relationship between customer support, customer success, customer service, and customer experience.
Nice.
So,
That'll be
okay,
great.
so
Yes.
these are interrelated, but there's a little bit of a hierarchy here. Customer service is the overall interaction, if you will, between the customer service group and the relationship that the customer has with that particular group. Customer support is what you typically see in most organizations. And it's kind of a break fix kind of thing. The customer will call in, say, I have a problem with this, or I have a question about the product. Can you help me with it? And then the frontline CSR, customer service rep, will either read through a script, which is really very unfortunate, and to try to get them back up and running. And usually those interactions are very transactional, and it's just a matter of they're almost trying to do as many customers as they can in a given hour thing. So they're more about efficiency at that point, and it's customer support. Customer success is a different animal. Customer success is really understanding why it is that the customer bought your product in the first place. What problem were they trying to solve with your product? Or where were they trying to get to with your product if it wasn't a problem? What were they trying to build with your product? The problem is that most of the time, the CS team doesn't know this, whether it's the tools that they're using and they haven't learned what the reason was for the sale being done or the goals that the customer was actually chasing. The sales team doesn't necessarily communicate this to the CS team. So the tools that we're using here can also come into effect. If you have the right tools, if the CS team is tied into, for example, your CRM, your customer relationship management tool, then you might have access to that. Maybe an even better way to do that is to start using AI to guide the conversation a little bit that the CSR is having with the customer. And then they can say, so you bought the product for this particular use. How's it going on that? Is it actually doing what it is that you wanted it to do? So it's okay. So it's actually a little bit. The customer is now thinking, now I remember why I bought this, and now I'm more excited about the product again, as compared to just simply now it's back up and running again, like you would with customer support. Customer success allows us to push the ball forward, to use an American analogy, to move the ball downfield, so that we can make a happier customer and us as a happier company, a happier vendor. So that's customer service, those two things, support and success. Customer experience is the overarching umbrella of all of that. The customer experience has to do with the overall experience that the customer has with the company from beginning to end. So it is a huge differentiator now as to which vendor a customer is going to go with. And they start analyzing it, whether consciously or subconsciously. A customer is going to be analyzing their experience starting from day one when they call. And what was the reception like? Did they get a phone tree? And so they get the old, please listen carefully because our menu options have changed. That kind of thing. Who wants to hear that? Nobody wants to hear that. Is it the type of thing where if they're interacting online, that they have a bot or some sort of an AI bot that only has a very small number of prescribed answers it can give? And so they should have actually gotten to a person in the first place, but there's no option to do that because of the way it was structured. Those are the types of companies that are geared not toward the customer, but toward the efficiency and the financials. So those are the types of companies that customers, when they have a choice, are going to move away from, and they're going to gravitate toward gravitate toward vendors that are going to treat them like human beings rather than just simply a number or a financial figure. So that's the customer experience, and that covers everything from beginning to end, the entire relationship, the entire time that they're with the company. And doing it all correctly is not easy. And keeping a customer happy is like trying to keep a friend, if you will. How do you keep a friend happy? How many of us have friends that are lifelong? So it's one of those things that you just have to think about consciously, not and proactively pursue the experience that the customer is having. Does that help?
Absolutely. There are just so many insights that have come out from what you mentioned. One thing I picked up, Bob, was something very, very crucial, which is the distinction between support services and customer success, and then an overarching customer experience team. Clearly, customer experience is something very holistic. It's not even limited to post a closure, rather it's right from the time when the marketing gets involved trying to engage with the prospects. How does a customer experience head or somebody who's leading customer experience initiative in an organization get the buy-in from these stakeholder groups, marketing, sales, strategy, corporate communication, branding, because just all of these have a play in how we are promising to the customers, how we are interacting, engaging, all of that. So how does one ensure that there's an alignment from these on giving importance and due acknowledgement to customer experience team as to let's work this out as a common group? What are the key measures in which this could be achieved?
Sure. So first of all, customer experience is not a thing that you do. It is a culture in the organization.
Beautiful.
So that's the first thing to understand. It is literally a top to bottom cultural shift that they either have or need to achieve in order to really get it right. In terms of what you need to do, I tend to start with, when it comes to any customer facing member, whether it's in the marketing team, sales team, CS team, whatever, I will ask them, I'll say, give me your top 5 clients and force rank them 1 through 5, however they want to do it, however they measure it. Excuse me. And so what happens is, almost exclusively, is when it comes time for them to tell me what their top 5 clients are, what I get back are things like Johnson & Johnson, Southern Dental, or Sam's Garage, or whatever the company happens to be. But it's always a company name. So I say, time out. Who's your client? It's the CIO of this, it's the VP of that. Time out again. Understand something. Companies do not sign contracts. Titles do not sign contracts. Markets don't sign contracts. Industries don't sign contracts. People sign contracts.
Beautiful.
So you need to be focusing on the people in order to get this right. So when we start talking about a particular activity that you're doing, I don't want to hear Southern Dental. I want to hear Mary, who happens to be with Southern Dental, and what is it that she is actually trying to achieve here? Because she's the one that's going to make the decision or influence others to make a decision to actually put their signature on the bottom line, and for that matter, to stay with you if there's a problem. So those are the types of things we need to get to right up front. How are they addressing their clients? If they can start calling people by a name rather than an account number, you're more than halfway there. But it is a tough thing to do because the rest of the organization is so financially geared. So we have to get that up not only into those three silos, the marketing, the sales, and the CS teams. And if you do that, by the way, that breaks the silo down naturally. Then we have to start pushing that up to things like the VPs, the regional VPs, and then up into the C-suite through the CRO. So that when they start talking about finances, it's not about an account or a company. It's about John from Boeing.
Absolutely. Bob cannot agree more. In fact, one challenge additionally, what I see is customer service success, whichever team is and tasked to do cross sells or upsells, they always have this challenge of coming across as salesy when they are engaging with the customers. Now, when it comes to sales, they're supposed to be salesy. Customers understand that. By default, there's an understanding of, okay, there's someone who's going to come in to sell. But when it comes to customer service success, there's additional responsibility of ensuring that we need to understand why they are taking our product or service, what are the problems we are solving, what value we are adding, how more we could add value. That consultative, relationship focused, value focused relationship to be driven on one side and targets on cross sell upsell on the other side. And that marriage is far tougher a thing to do than having a target at hand and driving sales. So I would say it's a much tougher job than sales, not comparing functions here. But then how does one balance the two, Bob? On one side being relationship focused, consultative, thought leadership led, value focused, and on the other side having a target centric sales approach to get the cross sells, upsells running. How does one marry the two?
The first thing is don't think of them as two separate things. They can think of them as together. The thing to remember is that when it comes to working with customers, they are geared toward being treated like a human being, which means we have to apply empathy in what it is that we're doing. It's interesting that you mentioned that sometimes you come across as salesy and the customer expects it. Well, do what the customer doesn't expect. So show the customer the fact that you can empathize and use EQ. Don't walk in just as the smartest person in the room, because there's always somebody smarter than you. I don't care who you are or where you are, there's always somebody smarter than you. So don't look at things as a challenge of knowledge and that I have more knowledge than you, therefore I'm better than you or something. So what you need to do is you need to really apply EQ as well as the IQ. So learning how to listen empathically and relate to people empathically is huge. That's a huge step in the right direction here. That not only makes the customer feel heard, but it also allows the customer to start expressing their emotions. Understand something. What we say, uh, the the um, uh, the statistics and the ratios vary, but the fact is that most of what we say comes through our body language.
Yes.
The second thing comes through things such as our tone that we use when we're speaking. And lastly, it's just the words, the actual structure of the sentences that we say, where the information comes from. But what are we relying on mostly when it comes to anything that we, for example, teach people or anything like that? It's the words. We're focusing on the smallest aspect of the communication channel that actually helps us understand what the customer is going through or what they're feeling. So empathy, if you will, EQ requires looking at the body language, the tone, and considering all of this at the same time as you're looking at the actual data, the message itself, and the data that's inside of it. So that is how you get to where it is that you need to be as far as empathy is concerned and really relating to the customer correctly. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely does, Bob. In fact, I've been in sales, and a lot of times sales leaders do talk about ABC, always be closing.
Oh,
When
yeah.
I always add it up by saying it's ABC, but then there's DEF, which is develop empathetic friendships. And
Mm-hmm.
GH, don't do it as a formula that if you have empathy, you will win. Rather, do it with genuine, honest intentions, GHI. So I say it's not ABC. ABC is not enough. You have to have ABC, DEF, and GHI. The wins will happen eventually. And I can't agree more with you, Bob, on that front. One last thing, though, on that very point, Bob, is when it comes to overall approach to this customer success as a function, do you think there is distinction between how large enterprises drive this versus how SMBs and mid-market organizations would drive it? Is there a differential that happens because of budgets, because of differential appetite to invest, or the way the customers are being looked at in general? Have you seen difference across these
Yes, but it's not so much the size as it is the type of customer that they're going after. Ideally, whether you're a large company or a small company, even if you're calling into, if I was to call into a large telecom company like Verizon or something like that, I would still like to be treated like a human being, like as if they were an SMB. So that's what the customer wants, right? They want a seamless experience regardless whether you're large or small. More of a differentiator there has to do with whether you're in the B2C or B2B space.
Right.
Okay, so if you're in there's two factors that come into whether a person will buy or not. So taking a look at it, for example, from let's just focus on CS for the moment, or customer service, and cross-selling and upselling. If you're in B2C or business to consumer, you're dealing with the end user almost automatically. They're the person that made the decision to buy the product, and they have buying authority. And so when you're in B2C as a CS or a CSR, you have the opportunity to cross-sell and upsell right there, almost on the spot, if you can apply EQ correctly. This happens to me, for example, almost every time I get on the phone with GoDaddy, who runs my website. So they're always trying to cross-sell and upsell me. Some of them are better at it than others, but I've been around the block enough times that I don't bite. I'm not too much of an old dog for that. But the point is that in B2C, it's based upon want and need right up front, and the person can actually want something. The end consumer is right there with you. In B2B, it's entirely different, because in B2B there has to be a business reason first before the person will actually buy. And typically, that's not how CS operates. CS does not establish business reasons. That is a sales function. So this is where the baton, if you will, gets handed back a little bit to sales. And the CSR can make a suggestion. If you wanted to get here, have you thought about maybe doing X, Y, and Z? You're adding this onto what it is that you already have. That might be something that might help you be more successful, back to customer success. It might help you be more successful and attain what it is that you want better. In that case, what we're going to do is reintroduce sales to the whole scene. And then CS and sales are going to walk together with the customer. The sales will establish the business reason in B2B for them to be buying. And then together, both the CS and the sales team will find out if they can drive it more toward the want. Is this something that you really want? Yes, it is. Great. One of the basic rules to remember here in sales and revenue generation is that people will tend to spend as little as possible for what they need, but they will open up their wallets for what they want. So what you need to do is you need to get from the need to the want as fast as possible, and then start talking about the want, because that really is how the customer is going to decide to buy. I'm sure we've all heard the phrase where to make a purchase is an emotional decision backed up by the data, logic, and rationality, right?
Yes.
And so the problem is that most sellers and most sales teams never really explore the EQ part of it, the emotional side of it, the want. They focus on the need, and then that's all they do. They just focus on the need.
Beautiful. When it comes to CX strategy, Bob, one of the curious questions is of the metric for success of CX. Most CX leaders that I talk to would default to NPS, CSAT, customer effort score, which are amazing metrics to have to understand the sentiment, the pulse. But what it doesn't give is a relationship to the outcomes, revenue outcomes more importantly. And then that impacts budgets, that impacts alignments, approvals, leadership buy-in, functional stakeholder buy-in, and so on. There's just so much at stake for want of a revenue metric, which the CX metrics cannot give on their own. So, what would be your recommendations for CX leaders who are trying to solve this problem? How would one approach this in terms of additionally seeking revenue metric as a measure for success as well? And how does one map NPS, CSAT, and other metrics to the revenue metrics?
Sure. So first of all, it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of both efficiency and effectiveness. Measuring efficiency is relatively easy, and because it's easy, a lot of CS teams will fall back on that. How many calls per hour did we manage to get through? What is the NPS when we get the data back? Anything that can be charted and looked at in that way is that's efficiency, right? The problem is that when it comes to people, we're trying to be effective, and sometimes it's difficult to be efficient with people. Sometimes, in order to be effective, takes more time. So what you have to do is you have to find a balance in there and really understand was the customer, for example, happier when they left the conversation than when they came into the conversation. That would be one measure of effectiveness. Were you able to move the customer's attitude along? Whether that's done by a subjective analysis, or maybe AI can come into play here again and really start to gauge the mood based upon the language that was used, the tonality of the conversation, to make sure that you move the customer along in a positive direction. That's another thing that you can take a look at, rather than things like NPS or other efficiency scores. Other things that have to do with, you can actually generate metrics by having customer focus groups. So tell us about what it is that this did and what that did. How did you like this, that, or the other thing? Don't do it through any kind of a survey. You can if you want to, but the probability of you getting really honest answers out of a survey, don't forget what I said before about body language, tonality, those kinds of things really being where the information is, right? You can get some information out of those, but don't rely on those. To really understand what the customer is thinking, you need to be having a conversation with them, either face-to-face or through video like we're doing here, so you can get a full picture of the entire communication channel and understand. So I guess the long answer short is that you need to take the data that you already have and think of that not as the final data, but I have to amplify this and augment it with the human aspect of it all and find out what the customer is actually thinking. That requires building up that trust and respect accounts. So those two things that you got to do, asking them to have an honest conversation with you. And honestly, if you ask people for their opinion on something, most of the time they're willing to give it, as compared
Absolutely.
to, so it's really not that difficult a thing to do. You just have to do it. And then you're going to have, again, an entire wealth of data that you can draw from to figure out where it is I need to make improvements or not.
Amazing. Bob, the problem about talking to people like you is that one always comes up with more questions than when you started, because the conversation opens up so many questions and you want to ask more and more and get to know more.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, time is limited. But I have a very important question to ask before I let you go, Bob, which
Sure.
is, of all the years working in CX and driving CX, leading CX, is there any CX myth that you would want to debunk, misconception that you want to highlight and call out and communicate?
I think I alluded to this earlier in the conversation. Control is a fallacy. Okay, if you cannot control people, you can influence people. You can nudge them using different tricks, if you will. They're not always advisable. Tricks aren't always advisable. But having an honest, open conversation is how you influence people to buy, and also be willing to back off of it if it doesn't look like you're a good fit. Do not sell something that they don't need. Don't do that. So in all the years, what I've experienced mostly is the fact that they need to just stop, or don't stop only at what they need. Get to
Beautiful.
what they want. And if you do that, you're going to have far more success. And just don't focus so much on the financials, because that will come. All finance is, all the numbers are an indication as to how well you did everything else. It's that
Nice.
lagging an indicator. So don't focus on the numbers. Focus on the activity that drives the numbers.
Thank you so much for sharing that lovely insight. I often say customer experience is right experience for the right customer. So
Mhm.
if you're going to sell the right thing to the wrong customer, it will never fly, or the wrong thing to the right customer, again the same thing. So right thing for the right customer, absolutely a must have. Thank you so much, Bob, for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. One conversation isn't enough. I'll soon be troubling you with a follow up on another episode, maybe on another topic. But till
Sure.
then, really appreciate your time and availability. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ash. I really appreciate it.